Hi, everyone. This is Paul Casey, the Kempo Karate Hall of Fame educational video series, where we discuss Kempo principles, concepts, and the teachings of the founding Grandmaster Ed Parker. Occasionally, we get real lucky and we have a couple of special guests to come on and discuss those principles. So tonight, we'll be discussing stances, structure, and power. We will have special guests with us, Senior Master of the Arts, Lee Wedlake. Lee is an author. He has written several books, and Lee, you can correct me if I'm wrong on it, Kempo Karate Compendiums and Forms and Sets of American Kempo. Those are two right there. And then also we have Mr. Todd Durgan with Face of Combatives Integrated. So gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Always good to be here, Paul.
Pleasure to be here and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate it because we're trying to elevate our teachings. Mr. Parker, as we all know, well, we don't all know, but for those of you that are listening, Mr. Parker truly believed in the educational process of the martial arts, not just to get in there and be an iron worker, but to be also a watchmaker, to understand the intricacies of what we're doing and trying to develop and grow it. He didn't think of this as being a tangible martial arts, but rather intangible, which had many different facets, and that it could be tailored to the student. But he never gave up on the educational background. So I'm going to jump on a few things that we talk about. In his writings, and I will reference it today, we will be using one of my favorite books, the Infinite Insights on Kempo, and this is volume 2, which came out in 1983. But I'm going to start with Infinite Insights volume 1. And in that book, I'm going to have to put some glasses on here. And in this book, and I think Mr. Wedlake could probably give us a better understanding on it because of he was there when this process was being done. And so anyway, this collective body of work, and volume 1 comes out and it's broken down, and he looks at page 98 and he says the categories that are the basic elements, and he basically laid them out as he thought they were of importance. He started off with stances: 1, blocks; 2, parries; 3, punches; 4, or strikes; 5, fingers technique; 6, kicks; and then 8 was foot maneuvers. And see, I have a problem with that because I would think you would want to place stances and then foot maneuvers before these others. Now, I understand white belts and you're learning and you just get your basic stance for training purposes. However, in 83, he comes out with the book, and in the book, in that he has 2 categories in that are really important to us, and they follow one another: stances and maneuvers. Finally, in his video series, which was released in 91, probably after, it was filmed obviously before he had passed, and it laid it out as stances and maneuvers as that importance. Now, I want to dive into all that stuff with these 2 gentlemen, and they're going to help us out with that. But before I do, there's 2 things I want to share. And I always reference other great scholars because I consider Mr. Parker one of the great scholars. Modern day involvement with his educational thinking. I know that both these gentlemen are authors, as I just mentioned. And you look at it, you go to somebody like in the Book of 5 Rings. It's really interesting how Miyamoto Musashi says on page 21, number 8, overlook nothing, regardless of its insignificance. Overlook nothing, regardless of its insignificance. And then you go to Sun Tzu, and Sun Tzu talks about maneuvers. And he says, quote, "The difficulty of tactical maneuvering consists in turning the devious into the direct and the misfortune into gain." So we're going to gain something tonight with these 2 gentlemen talking about it. Hello, Lee. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good, all things considered, for an old
What are
guy.
your thoughts on some of those comments that I put out right now, and also Mr. Parker's structuring of the categories?
Well, I think I may have mentioned in one of the last interviews is that I'm working on a follow-up book to the compendium, and I've got a couple of sections in there that refer to Musashi and Sun Tzu. And one of the reasons I like that is because they directly apply to us as martial artists in the tactical and the philosophical, and they are things that are taught in the military across the globe. I mean, this is stuff that was developed hundreds of years ago, and it's still valid today. So if it works for them, and it works for us. I like the references to them. And I was there when Mr. Parker was writing the books. I remember him telling me that Infinite Insights was supposed to be one volume originally. And then as he worked through it and he got input from myself and numerous other people, and to quote, he said, "It became more pregnant." And he decided to break it up into volumes. And I'm sure there was a business consideration as well, because you could chop it up and release it one a year at the internationals and all that. But he did have quite a bit of material. And I always like to go back and look at context. If you go back and look at his very first book in 1960 and then his second book in 1963, you see how the expansion that was happening already. And then you jump up, you go past the Women's Guide to Self-Defense, the basic booklet, you go past the Nunchaku book and so on. And then you see the Infinite Insights and how he was building and trying to put more and more in there. And it may have actually gone a little too far. But, it started to get a little overcomplicated in some respects when you get back into the late 80s. And he was resequencing, which is why you saw this in the books. Like, well, over here in 1983, it's this, and over here in 1984, 85, 87, it's this. As he was thinking about it, and when people would read the books, they would come back and ask him questions. And I think that as he thought it through and he discussed it with some of the other people that had input into it, he said, "Yeah, I think we're gonna have to clarify and change that." And I believe that accounts for a lot of the change in terminology and the resequencing. And we can get back to the basics, what I call the basics priority that you mentioned in just a minute.
It follows suit what Parker is doing by allowing the change, evolving. It's sort of like, if you think about it, his equation formula, which evolved from the rearrangement concept.
Right.
If you start thinking about these things, that's the same way this man was thinking. He was initially, he put it down. The hardest thing is, first of all, most of us understand, is getting the flow, getting to go get that creative juices. And if you stop on start all the time while you're doing that, it's going to disrupt that creative flow. So maybe it's best just to go through it all and then come back and clean it up. Right, Todd?
I agree. Yeah, as I'm going through the process of writing my second book, I see that is a major problem where, I might sit down on a Saturday morning, start plunking away, and suddenly all of the day's events interfere, and I know I'm in rhythm and I'm in time and I'm going and I got it going and it's in my brain and it's flowing out, and now I got to go water the dogs or something, and it all goes away. And then weeks later, I might pick back up on something else. But I wanted to just a quick little note on your first quote that you did, where it talks about no matter how insignificant, and how important that quote is, because insignificance is relative, right? It's very relative, and it's like the useful, useless, or unuseful, right? It's all relative to the individual's understanding, comprehension, and experience in the moment that they're making a decision as to whether that is or is not inconsequential, right? For example, a white belt may see, we're talking about stance as a stance change. They may see that rotation, that shift, and that pivot into a forward bow from a neutral bow in long form 1, and they see that and they understand that to be, or see that to be, inconsequential, because, man, I can hit hard already, and doing that little bit of rotation, that's not going to do nothing for me. And then later on, as time moves on, just like levers and leverage, like the universal, any of these elements, as people practice and study, in that moment, things are inconsequential. And you like to talk about moments and perfect moments. And those perfect moments, to me, are the ones where we see something inconsequential now having consequence, or being of consequence.
I think I'm going to go to Lee with this in a second, but I sort of think of it as the knowledge is like a river. Okay, the river is flowing, it takes everything with it. There's a lot of volume. You don't really see all the specifics. Then it starts to jet off into streams. It irrigates and then it evaporates and then it recycles itself. Well, the streams are sort of like wisdom. It starts to, you get a choice there. In the river, you don't. When you're the white belt, you're just taking everything, you're just looking at the big picture. It's sort of like looking at a brand new car. They sell you on the paint job and the leather, but they don't really talk about everything else that's going to possibly be with it. And you're not really into it unless you know. Then you get in front of somebody like Mr. Wedlake. And I remember watching him move on the mats in Pasadena with Frank and others. And they had such fluidity. I said, how do they do that so well? And it's just, one, they're talented, you know, those people that are at advanced levels. And two, they work their asses off. And people fail to understand that those stances are so important, especially when you go into the maneuverability. I mean, like, for example, Frank would like to use boxing principles in his footwork. All right. And he would move around and show that how that could apply. And then, as you said, the rotation, the torque, and then the power that would result. Throwing it to Lee. Lee, talk about these stances. Why is it so essential that we really get these down?
Well, you know, one of the things I was telling somebody the other day was about how Ed Parker labeled it. He called them basic fundamentals. And that term used to drive me nuts. Because I thought basics, fundamentals, isn't he saying the same thing twice? Well, he wasn't. Because you've got fundamentals, which are the components, and then you have basic fundamentals. You have the boiled down essence that is taught, you know, if you look at the requirement list, it said, you learn these stances, these blocks, etc. But as you go on through the system, there's things that are taught in the techniques that aren't on a requirement list. And they don't need to be on a requirement list. So therefore you have basic fundamentals. And then he prioritized them. And when I discussed it with Ed Parker, he said, you need a stance because you've got to establish a base. And this is one of the things that we like to teach children. You know, we tell them, get a good education so you can get a good job and, you know, you can get the money and the experience and the knowledge and all. So these are the life lessons that are encapsulated in physical movement. And so he said, you get a good solid base. Now, once you've got a good solid base, you can be more effective when you block. And a subcategory of blocks are parries. And this is the listing that you just mentioned a few minutes ago. Now, once you've deflected the attack, either by opposing it or riding it, now you can think about hitting them back. Do you want to hit them with your knuckles? Do you want to hit them with some other part of your arm? Do you want to hit them with your fingers? And then we get to the maneuvers and the kicking. He said, well, kicking requires more balance because you're on one leg. However, when you're maneuvering, you've got to manage energy. So this is difficult. And over time, then he switched those two in the priority. It was kicks, then foot maneuvers, and it became foot maneuvers and kicks, or vice versa. And you could tell he was thinking about that, and he renamed some other basics at the same time. I don't know if you remember the confusion about which switch was which.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Which one's front to back? Which one's back to front? Which and how about a one leg stance? For a long time, if you picked your left leg up from a left neutral bow, that was a left one leg stance. And then Ed Parker said, no, that's a right one leg stance because your weight's on your right leg. And a lot of us just went, so he was always rethinking these things, and then they manifested themselves in the writing, and that led to some confusion. So, and this points back to what I tell people. I said, if you can understand how he was thinking, you can understand the system better, not just what the system was teaching you, but what he was thinking when he put this together.
You go to somebody like Todd, and Todd, you must be thinking, and you have to ask yourself, how do I simplify this? You know, because you're in an advanced mindset right now, and you're trying to work with your younger. So that basic thing, and then you got to think about, we start asking these students to learn short one, just short one. And I hate to say it, Lee, I have some problems with guys that come in, and I have to correct those stance problems. Todd, take it from there. My God, it gets.
So Yeah, I've corrected a few stances and foot maneuvers in my time. Uh, so helping a beginner accumulate or be able to better execute basics, stances, footwork, I believe comes from their better understanding of purpose. If they have and understand the greater purpose for what they're doing or about to do or trying to do, then it's going to have more weight as they go through and try to get it dialed in, get it more perfected. Obviously perfection is impossible, but I think one of the greatest challenges for a teacher is not passing the information. It's passing that information with purpose and giving the student an opportunity to have a better understanding of what is the purpose for this neutral bow. What is the purpose for that pivot from a neutral bow to a forward bow? It's not just to turn your body or rotate, it's to extend the weapon into the target. It's to shift the weight, that 10%, which creates a 20% variable, get to that 60-40 weight distribution. It's to align the heel into the ground for a greater bracing angle, for backup mass, for all of these things. You get rotational force involved. You get the rotation of the hand, the alignment of the knuckle, the wrist, all of these things that happen. You create better posture, you create better balance. So all of those things are the purpose, right? They are the result of doing it properly, but they are also the purpose. And those things amassed together in synchronization create greater power and depth of penetration.
By the way, a reference to what Mr. Wedlake had said would be in Infinite Insights, Volume 2, page 44 on the organizational chart of basics. He calls it basics, and then he lays it out: stances, maneuvers, blocks, strikes, and specialized moves and methods. And then you get into chapter 6, and we look at that, and you go to page 48, and boy, oh boy, Mr. Parker got to town on this chart. You gotta look at this chart. It's like, I saw that. It was like, dang, it's like spaghetti got all together in this thing. How do I separate all this stuff with how the stances are broken down from attention, horse, the bow and arrow, the kneel, the cat, the twist, the specialize, and then he goes into even subcategories under that. Once you pick that up and talk about that, Lee, how he really broke all this stuff down.
Well, as you know, it's hard to write about motion. And he was trying to preserve this information because over time, Ed Parker was known as the instructor's instructor. He was the person, and we saw it everywhere we went, how high-level instructors would flock to him and ask him questions about things. He knew things that other people didn't know. And he thought they needed to know them, so he decided to write them down. And building all of that into the books is just, is a tremendous amount of information, which is what required it being multiple volumes as well. Because if you look at a lot of karate books, they're picture books, and there's not a lot of technical information in there. I mean, you can get weight distributions and so on, but he would tell you like this does this, and this can also be used as that. And he would discuss, what people might call the hidden movements in them. So he really felt like he had to get that information out there so it wouldn't get lost.
Were you ever there present when he was having a conversation with another system, style, or discipline, trying to exchange this information, but was getting a lot of pushback, or were they receptive?
That's a good question, because I had people that showed up at seminars in the Midwest because it was a big opportunity for them, because that was like the vast wasteland in there. He was out on the East Coast, he was on the West Coast, but for Ed Parker to be in the Midwest was kind of a big deal. And these people would come out of the woodwork. And I remember a man that was a hard stylist, I believe he did a Japanese system, and he had written to Black Belt magazine. And as he wrote his letter, he said, I was convinced that the back fist or the back knuckle was virtually useless. And then he went to an Ed Parker seminar at
Sorry.
my studio, and he wrote to Black Belt Magazine and basically apologized. He says, "Now I realize that the back fist is a very potent weapon." So I would see people come in with that mindset, like, "Yeah, you're really going to have to convince me," and he would with those sort of things. But as far as pushback, maybe once in a while, but not a tremendous amount.
I always thought it was interesting at the seminars, and I've seen this with other seminars, and you as a disciple of Mr. Parker and taking it, there's the question, well, I don't think that's really going to work, or I'm wondering if you've had those experiences, Mr. Wedlake.
Oh yeah, I've had them, had quite a few of them, and Ed Parker would tell us, how it was at Pasadena. You would see a line of black belts up there, and then he'd ask for a volunteer, and that front row would step back and leave somebody standing out there.
Yeah.
As he was the sacrificial lamb. And you get these guys, and he would just go to town on them. Then you get the occasional guy that, and you saw this too. He said, "Well, I don't know if this works," and then everybody would cringe and back up. And he would do it on him. There was a guy that said Twist of Fate didn't work, and he worked it on me. He said his body was out like a flag in 100-mile-an-hour wind when he did that one. So, and I've got lots of stories of being with him when somebody said, "Yeah, what about this?" And then I saw him bend a guy's chest once in Ohio. I mean, he hit him with a heel palm, a shuffle heel palm. It was a boom, 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 and that guy's eyeballs almost popped out of his head.
Let's go to Todd. I know both you and Lee have also dabbled into other styles. Lee, we're going to go back to you in a little bit with Tai Chi and stances. Todd, you incorporate different facets as well. Can you relate that to the importance of what we're discussing now?
Yeah, because other systems have, we go back to that useful, useless, unuseful, or that inconsequential, or other systems have great lessons in stance, footwork, rotation, body momentum, alignment, and all of those things. Two that I use the most are both Kali Eskrima stances, or Pakiti Tertia, and some Tai Chi stuff, because Tai Chi helps a student, depending on the drill you're using. I do kind of a push hands drill. It helps the student to learn how to relax. You have to be able to relax to do Tai Chi properly. If you can't relax, you're not doing Tai Chi. It will also help them to understand the shifting of weight, not necessarily with a neutral bow to a forward bow aspect, but how to rock on the heel, because a lot of Chinese systems rock back on the heel of the front foot and then move forward into that, like Tai Chi. Anyway, according the way that I learned it when I was doing this with an instructor of mine years and years and years ago. And so as you rock back and you're changing the timing to work with that rock so that everything is rotating and everything's rocking and moving, and it's a very relaxed, passive motion until that forward explosion happens, and then it becomes this dynamic move in the middle. Think of recent events. You have this very calm ocean, and suddenly a volcano explodes up out of the ocean, right? It's kind of the same thing. You have a very calm, passive motion happening, and then all of a sudden it explodes into this thing. But learning how to roll, rock, maneuver, and time the feet, the body, the rotation, the shift, the back and forth. That's in Tai Chi. Now in Pakiti or Kali Eskrima, you have the triangle stance or the V stance, the step, the footwork, and all that, where you're doing pretty much the same thing, just with a different application and a different intent or focus and intent.
Is that the key, Lee? Intent and focus?
Well, you've got to have some intention in the beginning stages. I mean, ideally what happens is you have that mushin, the empty mind. and you're not thinking about what you're doing. So intention is like, well, intention sometimes will get you in trouble. I remember when I was working in Russian Sistema, they said the intention gets there first. And this is how they're able to read incoming attack energy. So that's an interesting idea. In my mind, when you're teaching Kempo or karate and you're teaching Tai Chi, you're really doing the same thing because it's slow motion. Because you can't get a beginner to do short form one quickly right off the bat. They have to step back, settle their feet, look at their feet, straighten their back, tuck their hips, bring their head up. And they do all the same things that you would do in Tai Chi. So they're slow motion martial arts. And the Tai Chi people say, well, you keep it in slow motion. They've got good reasons for that. Whereas the karate people say, well, now we got to speed it up and get the upper with the lower. So what Todd was saying about learning how to rotate and what we call a dissolve, to take the incoming energy and dissipate it and then feed it back in the Fa-Ching explosive energy. That's the next stage up.
Did you have any conversation with James Ebrow?
No.
I did it, and did you have any with him, Todd?
Yeah, I got to take a couple of multiple hours private with the gentleman out down in Troutdale when he came up to visit. I don't know. It was time well spent. I'll just say that.
It's interesting. Well, he would talk about, slowing down and doing Tai Chi with the forms. He just says, slow it down, and it is that. Now, Lee, you've had a lot of experience in Tai Chi. I know that you've had some videos, instructional videos on it. How do you feel about the use of the rocking from the back of the heel to the toe as they use versus our Kempo or our karate is more flat-footed? Can you get caught up in that?
Now that's the difference in style and system. And by training in something else, you look at Tai Chi and say, well, that's an interesting idea. I don't know if I like it, but I can understand why they do that. So you take some of these ideas in Kempo and you go, well, maybe that would be more applicable in the Tai Chi as well. So you get an opportunity to cross-index this information. And as I said, everybody's got a different way of doing things.
As Parker, you notice when Parker does a kick, remember whenever you do a kick, say a front ball kick or a step through kick or something, you notice where his weight is on his rear, the one foot that's supporting him. Where is it?
He locks it down.
Yeah, it's like right there.
Yeah, it should be like that. And it should be like that.
Snapping. Okay, let's go to structure there. Todd, you wanted to discuss some of that before, and let's jump on that.
Yeah, so structure. So it's funny because when I was working on book 2, as you imagine, I've got notes everywhere. And I did these ground up analysis and all this other things. And actually, the structure of the stance has to be 2 things, depending on what the application is. Again, we go back to that, inconsequential, or what was the word we were using initially?
Insignificant.
There you go. The insignificance or the significance of a move, an application of a move from, let's say, the Tai Chi relaxed rocking back to the Kempo karate going forward with the weight distribution into a forward bow. The connections, and I can't imagine that Mr. Parker didn't study a little bit of kinesiology, because if you look at the way some of the stances and timing are linked from a neutral bow to a forward bow, if they're done properly, then you're connecting these things, and you have this kind of sequential linking of the joints and muscles along the way, if they're done properly, in my opinion. So we get to posture, or we have all of these elements, right? We have stance, the foot position, the legs, the hips, the posture, the spine and shoulders, and then you get to awareness, mobility with regards to the head and the position of the head. And so initially, a white belt, for example, is focused on what is a neutral bow? And all of those other elements that I just mentioned are there, but those aren't elements that they're focused on. They're not elements that they're working on, and nor should they be, which goes back to why Mr. Parker arranged the preference or the order of importance with regard to, stance, maneuvers. And like Mr. Wedlake was talking about, a kick is a more complicated or difficult maneuver than a foot maneuver, a step drag or drag step. So it should be placed at a different place in the hierarchy than foot maneuvers, because that requires some postural changes. It requires some different connections. It requires some different placement of feet, head, balance, all of those things.
Do we have a problem with the order of the stances and the importance of them?
What do you mean by a problem with that?
Well, I mean, some of these stances are stationary and some are transitory.
I see what you're saying.
Maneuver. You have maneuver in it. You just don't go into a twist stance. You have to move into a twist stance.
Well, and that's why they're called transitional stances, though, right?
Right, but I'm trying to understand how this is with the students and the structure of his learning.
But yeah, you rotate into a twist stance, right? And that rotation happens as a result of the body, the hips, the feet, the pivot, all of those things happening, and some settling or dropping. I mean, a twist stance is a twist stance. Rotating into the twist stance is the transitory move, right? The rotation, the pivot. Cat stance, for example, you can camp out in a cat stance if you want, but a cat stance is most often seen as is a reverse bow, is most often seen as a transitional stance, something that you're doing that happens more incidentally on the way to, let's say, a front snapping ball kick, or on the way to a reverse step through, or on the way to a back crossover, going backward.
You consider these lead transitory moves?
No.
Okay.
The
good.
definition I was given of a stance is a frozen transition. So it's somebody took a snapshot and said, now, if you're going to be in this position, this is how your arms, your legs, and your upper body and your head should be positioned. And anybody that fights knows that if you stand in a stance, you're going to get hit. So you've got to get moving, but you need to have a way. It's an instructional method to say your weight should be like this, your hip should be like this, your hand should be like that. And then you learn how to maneuver. And so you have these technicalities that will drive you absolutely nuts, especially if you try to teach them to the students. It's like when we say do a front crossover, we typically think, well, you're going to cross your leg and then you're going to step out. Well, the crossover part is the first part, and then the step out is the second part. So technically, it's a front crossover step out. But if you try to get that across to an orange belt, they're just, I think I'll go to the other school down the street.
So we're looking at a transitory move is really just a maneuver.
Yeah, a transition.
Let's keep it simple. I think that's what Parker would want us to believe.
Yeah,
I mean, you can break this stuff down and get real technical. And
well,
I know Todd can break that down and you can break that down. But
Todd's absolutely right when he says, you transition through a cat stance. You don't stand in a cat stance. We've seen the person in a karate tournament that tried to fight somebody from a cat stance and get his ass kicked. Okay.
That's your Daniel-san.
Some people can do
watching Cobra Kai or something.
Yeah. I mean, I was at a tournament back in the 70s where a guy actually stood in a crane stance, and he was a kung fu stylist. He got into a crane stance, and the karate guy just hit him with a crossing side kick and knocked him out of the ring.
It's funny. I was at the internationals and I saw something like that with a guy, so it wasn't like it wasn't something had been around, but it was interesting. That was in the late 70s, early 80s, before that movie ever came about. Yeah, I saw that with those guys, and everybody was doing the Bruce Lee thing,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But stances are just taught as a way to say, let's get you an idea how this works and what your anatomical alignment should be, and then we're going to put it into motion. And that's where we do the techniques and we do the forms. The purpose of forms is to tie your upper body with your lower body and get them synchronized. And then you get the applications and the techniques. But those basics that are taught will say, here's how you get the flow of that and how you get the basic timing. And then you can talk about the breathing and all that good stuff.
Todd, your thoughts?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly what I said.
It is.
Well, you had brought up something earlier in a previous discussion with me, and I thought we'd probably want to visit that related to these discussion of stances and structure and maneuvers. And if we look at maneuvers, that obviously is covered in Parker's book in chapter 7. And I think it is here. And there's a great organizational chart on it. And boy, man, there is a lot to this guy. I mean, there really is when you break it down. And you have it in there. And obviously maneuvers, he has it with the body, and then he has it with the foot. Help me understand those two, guys. We're going to separate them like that.
Body maneuvers and foot maneuvers.
Yes, sir.
That's pretty self-explanatory.
We have actually in the foot maneuvers, we have 8 of them, but there is a crossover on one of them. And in the body, we have 9 maneuvers. If I go from the book. And
Well, you have, 9 before your specialized moves and maneuvers, right?
Yeah, the specialized is I think is the catch-all there. But when you get down to body, it also overlaps with feints. You feint on something, then you have specialized. Where in the foot you have step throughs, shuffles, crossovers, twists, jumps, dives, and feints. Dives.
Dive roll.
I'd be jumping out of the way if I had Parker coming at me. Okay, there's a dive for you. I'll take the dive. I'll jump out of the way, and Lee's like, why did you do that? I left him exposed. But no, yeah, and then you have the rest of these things, which is interesting. I want to know what the specialized maneuvers are on her foot and body. Why don't somebody explain that one to me?
Well, Mr. Parker and I had a discussion about that because when I was out there at Pasadena for one of my lessons, he handed me the manuscript to either volume 2 or volume 3 and said, take this back to your hotel room and read it. And I stayed up all night looking through this thing. I mean, it was typewritten in a manila folder. And I brought it back to him the next day. And here you go. He says, well, did you make any corrections? I said, you got to be kidding me. But I said, but I do have questions. So I said, well, because he was talking about hopping, leaping, jumping. And I said, I saw a street fight and this guy put his hands on the hood of the car and he kind of vaulted into this guy, like with a sidekick. And he went, yeah, because you do that in the staff set. You do a vault.
Mm-hmm.
And then he got excited and he said, if you vault, you can hurdle. Because these are different methods of motion. And that's what he was cataloging with these. So when the book came out, wouldn't you know, there's vaulting and hurdling in there. So there are things that was like, well, we don't have a technique that has a hurdle in it. But what he's telling you is that you can do this. If there's the time and the place is right, you can do that. That's what Kempo's all about. Because we got some rather, people look at the techniques and go, that's kind of odd. I don't know if I do that. Well, you don't know. And if you change the environment, it's like, that's maybe a whole different place. You go, okay, I need that. I need that in that particular position. So that's where you started to see some of those specialized movements. And as you know, when we do in Parker Kempo, we don't bob, slip, and weave. But he was a boxer. His families were boxers. Frank Trejo was a boxer. I boxed. And you go, well, there's some pretty useful moves there to put bobbing, slipping, and weaving in with your teach your students how to do that. And it integrates very well into the Parker system. So that's what you started to see some of the movements of body maneuvers going in there, even though they're not on a basics list for any particular belt rank, or at least they weren't back then.
Todd, where would you place kneeling?
So I have an attribute that we just did in class last night, ironically, that drops down into it's a hayari gashi. I can't pronounce it very well. It's somewhat of a judo throw, where you drop down into a kneel stance in front of them, take the arm and the gi, you drop down into one kneel on one knee, kneeling stance, and pull them over into a throw. So does it have many applications? Yes. Is it super applicable? I mean, you have to have those situations like Mr. Wedlake was talking about with regard to, is there a car to vault off of? Bobbing and weaving, I've integrated that into some hoobud drilling so that we have, as you're going through the hoobud, you're working, the guy just throws out a haymaker and you got to work on your bobbing and weaving. So, a lot of these things, they may not be on a list, but the things that are useful, like you guys are talking about, Mr. Trejo was a boxer, and look at the good boxers. I mean, they're good at that stuff, and those are useful maneuvers. Those are useful body maneuvers. Those are useful foot maneuvers. I mean, in my opinion, anyway. So I try to incorporate those in my drilling and into my system.
It all falls into Mr. Parker's toolbox. Never discard any tool. There is a purpose. As to our system, I always think of form 4. I don't know. I call it form 4, bowing to Buddha, and you drop down on that knee. I got to tell you, I've gotten old. It's getting hard to get out of the second kneel popping up. you know what I'm talking about, guys? I'm talking, Lord of mercy.
Yeah, that's a difficult maneuver because now you're relying on your own strength and agility to be able to bring yourself up. Whereas the attribute that I'm talking about is actually force controlled through the opponent's weight. So you're not actually dropping onto your knee. You're more utilizing this kind of circle of motion, yin yang, so to speak, to drop in front, and their body weight, the resistance of their body weight is offsetting your drop to the knee, and then you pull them over or throw them over. If you do it violently, you drop gently onto your knee and they drop very violently onto their back or their side.
We do see, Aleem, don't we see in the greenbelt techniques, I'm thinking 32 when I came up, there was a lot of the rotation where you roll forward off a knee and then a roundhouse kick. Or, and think about this is the other one. It's not mentioned there, squatting. Remember squatting sacrifice? Lord have mercy. I got to tell you, I always think of Mr. Parker when he was down in Brazil and he was in his business suit. And he adapted. He lost his weight, his balance, and he fell on Frank. It was like the reverse of squatting sacrifice, called squatting Frank. But that's the beauty of the Kempo. He adapted to it so quickly, knowing how to make that work. And I mean, there's probably other moves that we haven't even talked about that'll probably evolve. I mean, with people and bodies and such. So we're looking at these maneuvers. Do you put more importance on any particular ones or how they're set up, Lee?
I like the way that Mr. Parker laid it out because it's progressive to start with the beginners and get them shuffling and so on. But I like to do the integration. I've got a black belt of mine in Tampa, Florida, named Eddie Cabrera, who's a 5th degree, and he won the Golden Gloves in Pennsylvania many years ago. And he's got some really slick footwork. And he ties it in with some great body maneuvers, and he does a fusion. In fact, he and Frank Trejo knew each other. And so, Frank had his Kempo and boxing together, and they both had very similar names, like a boxing fusion or something like that. So Eddie puts the boxing into the techniques. So you may be starting Dance of Death and then come in with a body hook and an uppercut and then the takedown and so on. So it's pretty cool to watch how they do that. And with these transitions in the beginner material, and I'm working on up to what Todd was saying about the kneeling, I'm working on this next book, and I talk about how we have the kneel position and other points of origin and what they teach us. So in 4, you're seeing not only how to come up out of that kneel, but you're learning how to go down into the kneel. And then it repeats itself in 5. And then we have other techniques like encounter with danger, leap from danger, and so on. So we've got working from the ground, whether we're on our back or whether we're on our stomach. So we're prone or supine, and how we transition out of those. And what he's trying to get us to look at, because it's he taught us, as you do the techniques, he's like, this is how you work on an opponent who's on his back, he's on his stomach, he's on his side, he's up against the wall, or he's, you know, still standing, but he's bent over. And you recognize these different positions, but then you got to look at your position as well and how you get in and out of those.
Yes,
So-
Todd.
And if I may add to that, so we were talking about transitory positions and stances, and if you look at leap from danger, we have a transitory what? Kneel. Because you're moving through that kneel stance, that single knee stance after the roll to come up, out, turn around, and go in your technique.
Right.
So,
You know, I like the idea. We think of kneel that your knee is on the ground, but it doesn't always have to be on the ground. It could be actually on the opponent who's on the ground.
Right,
and I like that. For example, the techniques out of form 5, where there's the wide kneel and the closed kneel, and I'm also big on the positional checking, standing up using your knee as a sort of a pinning kneel, but you're standing up without being on the ground. What do you think of that?
No, they're all valuable leveraging tools.
Todd?
absolutely. And how, you know, what is the value? The value is that you're able to now, through mere position of stance, check an existing weapon or an available weapon of an opponent, so that they no longer have that weapon, or they no longer have weapons. If you check the leg or the knee or the whatever part of the body it is properly, you minimize or limit or restrict or remove their ability to rotate back into you with the rear weapon or the rear foot, or however it works. Look at Deflecting Hammer, for example. Is that right? Yeah, Deflecting Hammer. As you move in to that elbow, if you have that check on that shoulder properly, or down on that elbow properly, and you move in that elbow, you've checked everything. But more importantly, if you look down below the waist at the knee, and you've come in to their leg with that knee, with that neutral bow and that knee checking, just a little bitty bump to take the balance out. Now what happens is you offset their brain function for about a millisecond and take away their ability to counter or retaliate, ideally.
You got any final thoughts, Todd, before we close out on this segment?
You know, yeah, I will never cease to be amazed how somebody could think that they have a solid. I mean, a solid grasp is one thing, but I don't know. Maybe I just need another 20 years, and then I'll figure I have it all. I don't know.
I think one of the things there's been a comment that material was actually divided and organized and structured up to 5th degree. But boy, I'm telling you right now, I'm here and I feel like a white belt with this material, Lee. I mean, I think this is never ending. I'd hate to be inside Mr. Parker's mind. You know,
No, I'd love that.
No, but yeah, but to sort it out in there, you said no, but I got questions. Well, you know what? I'm really excited you guys are writing still, and you're going to continue on that. It's an important facet because we always use Mr. Parker's books as a reference. I would encourage any of our viewers to take the time, go back through them. If you can pick up the tapes which came out, and look at them. And I think they're you can get them on YouTube. You can watch them and such. You get these things and you can hear from his own lips what he says. If you have any questions, and you go to somebody like, Mr. Wedlake or Mr. Durgan, and you ask these questions, and hopefully they'll be able to define and help you understand, because it is a continuing process. Any final words there, Mr. Wedlake, before we close?
Yes. One thing that I learned a long time ago that they teach in the Chinese arts is, if you have a problem with your hands, you got to check your feet. They don't say it like that, but it's absolutely valid. I mean, you're having trouble throwing a good solid punch. It's like maybe you're not turning that back foot and aligning, using the kinetic chain that Todd was talking about earlier. So working on the feet and getting your awareness from your head all the way down to your toes is key. And Mr. Parker told us that, especially in the promotion ceremony. He said, knowledge gets in your head before it gets to your hands and your feet. So you got to get the awareness all the way down to your fingertips and all the way down to your toes, form your weapons correctly, do your stances correctly, and then put it all together and make it a repeatable skill.
You know, I always like to reference books, and I know that Lee has used some of these. And I know Todd does as well. I'm a big fan of the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. And you can see that reference many times through many martial arts. Some of them plagiarize it or they restructure it, whatnot. But one of the things that I like that I got out of it was do difficult when easy, do great when simple. Tonight's been a great conversation with you two gentlemen. Thank you so very much. I wish you the very best. Look forward to seeing you again in the near future, Mr. Wedlake. I hope you feel better. And Mr. Durgan, always a pleasure. With no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Kempo Karate Hall of Fame with Todd Durgan and Lee Wedlake, my name is Paul Casey. Thank you very much. Salute.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Casey, thank you, sir. And Mr. Wedlake, always a pleasure and an honor.
Thanks. Good to listen to you.
Take care, gentlemen. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.